Okay, good morning everybody, and welcome to this morning's stakeholder workshop in relation to round 2 of the Scottish Government's MaaS Investment Fund. Thank you for joining us today. Good to see some familiar faces on the call, and equally encouraging to see some new names there as well. This session, I guess, really kicks off the long anticipated journey towards round 2 of the MaaS Investment Fund, and we'll give you guys the opportunity to get first sight of the processes, the timelines, and the thematic areas that will form part of the next phase of the MaaS Investment Fund. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Ali McInroy. I'm the Chief Exec at Technology Scotland, and among other things, we run the MaaS Scotland network. Hopefully that'll be a network that's familiar to many of you, if not all of you, but just very briefly, we are now a network of over 75 public and private sector organisations from across the MaaS supply chain, each with a shared vision to develop and deliver and upscale mobility as a service solutions across Scotland. However, we appreciate that the network is only part of the story. It's a great foundation to build from, but what we're really focused on of late is the development and the facilitation of projects and project programmes that will help to generate an overall evidence base for the impact of MaaS in Scotland. And that's where the MaaS Investment Fund plays, of course, such a crucial role. As most of you will be aware, the fund was launched last June at our annual conference when physical events were still allowed. And the first 3 projects from that fund, supported through that fund, are now up and running. And those 3 projects, along with projects supported through round 2, are going to be absolutely crucial in building that evidence and database, which will ultimately inform future policy, funding, etc. And of course, it's an opportunity for us to place Scotland as a global lead in MaaS development and test beds as well. Moving on to today's agenda and talk briefly about format and a little bit of logistics. You'll see there's been a slight change to the agenda as advertised. Due to speaker availability, we've had to rejig things very slightly. So we're going to kick off with 3 short 10-minute presentations on each of the thematic areas associated with round 2, and delighted to welcome some subject matter experts to help guide us through that. It's a very compact session today, so there won't be time for direct questions to our 3 initial speakers, unfortunately, but as you'll see from later on, we do have breakout sessions across these thematic areas, which will be an opportunity to talk more about these presentations and ask any questions that you may have. That will be followed up by a presentation from Transport Scotland, who will give us an update on the progress of the MaaS Investment Fund programme to date, and also, of course, crucially, that information around round 2, which will hopefully help you guys to begin to formulate how you're going to engage with that process over the coming months. That will be followed by a 20-minute Q&A. I'll talk a little bit about how we do that when we get there, but this is a really important part of it for obvious reasons. It's an opportunity for you guys to ask any burning questions that you might have, either already or once you hear a little bit more about round 2. But also, I think it's important to point out that while the process and the kind of documentation for round 2 is at an advanced stage, it is not absolutely finalised. So here is an opportunity to raise issues, questions, concerns that you may have, and there is still time for that to be taken into consideration around the ultimate delivery of round 2. So please do use that opportunity. There will, of course, be further opportunity to do that in the breakout sessions after our short break as well. I would encourage you to use the chat functionality on your screens. It's at the bottom of your screens, maybe the top, for a couple of reasons. One, we will almost certainly not be able to get through every question and comment on this, but we will record everything, of course. So please use that to make any comments that you may have, any statements that you'd like to make, any questions that you might have, please put them into there. It's also can be used as a relatively useful networking tool as well. We appreciate at the moment, as you guys will too, networking in the current climate is extremely difficult. And we understand that at Technology Scotland and MaaS Scotland more than most, because it's a big part of what we do, and it's not easy. And it's, of course, that has particular challenges in the run-up to a competition like this. So please do use that. You'll be able to see fellow people on your call. Please do engage with them or engage more broadly with the group wish. We'll then have a short break and then move on to breakout sessions, but I'll touch on the breakout sessions as we get closer to them. But it's quite a simple process. So, and you guys at home don't have to do much about that. So that'll all make sense later. Okie doke, that is us for now. So we're going to move on to our first set of 3 presentations. And I'm delighted, first of all, to welcome Andrew Seathouse. He's the Director of Transport at the University of Plymouth, who's going to guide us through rural and islands connectivity. So Andrew, if I could ask you to share your screen, and over to you.
Thank you, Ali. There we go. If technology has worked, you're seeing a very pretty sheep from North Ronaldsay. Hopefully they won't mind me stealing the picture from their internet site, but we did have our honeymoon up there, so I think they'll be okay with that. Thank you for inviting me today. My name is Andrew Seathouse. I'm the Director of Transport at the University of Plymouth, based within our Sustainable Earth Institute. For those of you who do not know me, I've been working on rural and sustainable transport and technology for almost 30 years, both for government and industry. Now, normally at any sort of London type MaaS related transport ticketing event, there'll always be a group of sculpted, bearded hipsters trying to sell their wares, who continually state that this time next year there will be no such thing as tickets, and whose urban app startups are just desperate to be bought out by one of the tech giants so they can go and spend more time on their electric scooters. But the reality is we work in a world of operations on the ground, particularly rural and islands communities, in serving those who are hardest to reach. And actually it's no good having a lovely singing and dancing app if you haven't actually got a bus there to use it on. So as an alternative in my 10 minutes, and as a prelude to our breakout sessions, I'd like to talk to you about where I see the real opportunity here for MaaS from the context of your rural and island communities. I'd like to give you an outsider's viewpoint of your current service provision. I couldn't really be further away, based down here in Cornwall, but looking in at it and hopefully to stimulate a debate later on, mainly about governance and the potential for the phase 2 funding work. So this is what I hope to do. Now, please let me outline what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to go through with you about the localised intricacies of rural transport provision. It is already clear from the pre-meetings that we've had with the MaaS team that you're a very informed audience, and you'll already be aware from previous events, such as the Rural Transport Convention, about the specific challenges associated with meeting the needs of rural and isolated communities. You know, an emphasis on demand responsive and flexible travel services, the optimization of third-party resources such as post buses, the need for community activism through schemes such as car sharing and car clubs, the pooling of resources through partnership working, and the very important role that community transport plays in fulfilling in what most societies is a statutory duty of care of the care sector. I'm taking as read that you already know the very fine line between cost benefit and accessibility that is played out within our rural communities. Likewise, I will not be repeating the overview of the relationship between MaaS Scotland and rural transport. Ali, in a previous MaaS Transport Scotland event, has summarised this very well, and that presentation is already widely available. What I wish to do is to focus on what I see as being the centrepiece of Ali's previous presentation, on which MaaS needs are based. And that's the underlying building blocks of quality data, customer access, and connectivity. I wish to focus on where I see you are today and where MaaS Scotland could sign you a very nice phase 2 cheque to take you forward to a new tomorrow. So let's start with the basics. Scotland already provides more access to services and spends more per capita than anywhere else in the UK on rural transport provision. And to an outsider looking in, it really shows. Now, you'll probably not agree with me, and I do accept and I apologise that this sounds really patronising, but I actually genuinely believe, as a starting point, you already provide a good rural and island connectivity service. Buses are and will largely always be the bedrock of our UK public transport. Within Scotland, you already have over 4,000 buses operated by a very large number of operators, and each of whom has on their bus a 3G and smart card enabled ticket machine, reporting its position every 10 seconds in real time. Now, these ticket machines represent, in my opinion, one of the most important building blocks of all, which is the interface between the customer and the service provision. Many, but not quite all yet in Scotland, can accept payments by contactless bank card, Apple Pay, Android Pay, all of which is a growth area and a prelude to mass opportunities on account-based ticketing. All can take cash, and there is a big lesson here for mass innovators, never to forget the importance of cash to public transport users, and disproportionately, when compared to the rest of society, may not have bank accounts and therefore be capable of engaging in account-based ticketing or EMV provision. Many of the ticket machines as well, but not all, can already accept pre-purchased mobile tickets via barcodes or QR codes. All of your big bus groups already have this facility available for their own customers and products. It's been around for a number of years. So where are all your multi-operator QR products? There's no reason you shouldn't use this for them. Lastly, and most importantly, in terms of transaction methodology already in use in rural Scotland, is the National Entitlement Card and the variations thereof. Why are we so heavily based on smart card provision? Well, the reality is it's all about auditing the entitlement and the provision so the correct user receives the correct entitlement or product for a specific journey, which you can track and settle according to your own defined set of business rules. You already provide each local authority with its own branded card, and with up to 22 unique card types per authority spread over 7 entitlement groups, you already have 704 card variations in operation before you even add a single rural product on to them. You already reserve the secure part of the smart card shell, the ITSO shell, for transport products, be they local bus, coach service, local rail, community transport, ferry or air services, and then you use the free space on the card for your other complementary service areas, be it secure door access within council or office environments, e-purse for coordinating school dinner payments, accessing the leisure centres and hosting the library card facilities. All of those are existing uses on your entitlement cards. And you do this daily for over 1.8 million cardholders within Scotland, generating well in excess of 200 million transactions per year. And every single one of those transactions is recorded, encrypted, exchanged, stored, and used to settle payments and provides customer support through a very complex supply chain network of software platforms. This is big data in operation, and this should be the bedrock of an effective MaaS platform. I should also say that this is only available as a result of your effective partnership working and governance. And that is the second cornerstone, in my opinion, for MaaS Transport Scotland. You already have the government providing the main kernel here, the hops, the processing engine for your transactions, and NECPO, brought together all of your local authorities and hosted by Dundee City Council, already provide the entitlement card application layers. And please don't underestimate the importance here of the transport partnerships that you already have. You already have area-based partnerships at a sub-regional level, taking responsibility for local delivery. And again, you might not agree with me here, but from an outsider's viewpoint looking in, you also have a much closer relationship between your central government in the form of Transport Scotland and these local government and sub-regional partnerships that exists in England. And dare I say this, a much more informed government when it comes to operational issues and necessities. Now, in my opinion, for MaaS, partnerships and governance is everything. You might have the greatest of ideas, but if you can't deliver it, then why waste money trying? And that really brings me to the core two themes for the Rural and Islands Connectivity Workshop later on. A single slide on each, one on optimising what you have and the opportunities of MaaS, and then innovating with the opportunity of MaaS. So in trying to pull this together, certainly looking at what you already have, I believe that you should consider building on what is there, making it more available, refining it, and making it more integrated with other parts of the transport supply chain. You already do a lot. You have a detailed and sophisticated data platform for the NAC card, you have established partnerships, and you have good governance. Build on this, develop more open APIs for your complementary areas in rural services, be they local rail, be they community transport, be they your ferries and your air links, and integrate them more to fewer single customer-focused platforms through areas like your national My Account service. Have a look what others are doing, nick all the good bits and rework it for yourselves and standardise wherever possible. You'll see I've included here a copy of the CPT bus strategy moving forward together. This is committing to multi-operator EMV pay wave capping in all towns in England by 2022. Are you working with the CPT in Scotland so that the delivery platform that the bus operators are building can be made accessible to yourselves and integrate with your own services? And if not, why not? Is this not an opportunity for MaaS? So very lastly for me in this 10 minutes on the innovation side, now this is the difficult slide. This is where I promised to raise a few areas for debate here. You already have onboard vehicle equipment. You already have detailed, secure back office systems with a lot of open APIs. So you have security, you have the data. Why not embrace the opportunity afforded by the true principles of MaaS and use round two to answer some real interesting questions? Why do you have 32 local authority branded cards? Why not one? About 4 years ago in England, we went down from 238 concessionary brands to 88. Nobody minded. Personally in England, I think you can get down to about 13 or 14. You can always protect local entitlements electronically. What's the significance solely of a logo? Why not give me, as a transport resident, my own budget allocation, be it for carbon, be it for cash, and let me decide how I wish to use it. There's no value in giving me free bus travel if there isn't a bus. Let me spend it on paying my neighbour to take me into town. If I can't have my own budget to buy services, why not let me trade the transport allocations you give me that I don't actually want to use? You can have my ferry journeys because I actually want some more railway journeys instead. Why not use the technology to support local service provision? Likewise, we have the card, the entitlement card. We don't have an app equivalent for it. Why not? Now, I know why not. Comes down to primary legislation. But why not use elements of your round 2 funding to unpick some of the barriers and to explore what could be done differently? And this is the big one, really. Are your governance models fit for purpose for the next 50 years? And what have we learned through COVID that might want us to plan differently for rural and island transport provision? And ultimately, to conclude, and at this point I will run away after reading this last one, are we really looking to provide mobility as a service to the rural and islands residents, or the continuation of authorised limited mobility for administrative convenience? Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Andrew, for that. Plenty to chew on there, I think, in the context of the MaaS Investment Fund programme, and I suspect also almost beyond, and certainly lots to consideration during our discussion section. So thank you very much for that introduction. Just as a point to note, for clarification, MaaS Scotland will not be signing any cheques related to the MaaS Investment Fund. Just to be absolutely clear on that, it is not our money, if only. So no, that is, there are people with much more power to wield than we do on that.
Wishful thinking on my part.
Indeed. Anyway, thank you very much indeed. We're going to move on to our second presentation, and I'd like to introduce, I'm doing this while I share my screen for Hillary's slides, but I'd like to introduce Hilary Stubbs, who's the Vice Convener of the Mobility and Access Committee for Scotland, who's going to talk to us about accessibility and inclusivity. So hopefully we can all see that. Hilary, over to you.
Morning, everybody. Ali has already given me my introduction. A little tiny bit about what MaaS is. MaaS is a non-departmental body which advises the ministers and Transport Scotland. And our main area obviously is in accessibility. We look at various themes each year, and certainly rural and island transport is one of those key features that we look at. I, until 2 months ago, was an island dweller, and one of the main reasons that I left the Isle of Arran was because of a lack of connectivity. To give you an example, if this meeting had been a live meeting in Edinburgh, it would have taken me 3 days because I couldn't travel on the day of the meeting and I couldn't get back on that day. So we have huge challenges living in island communities. Fortunately, one of the only things that's come well out of COVID is the fact that we have got a lot more connectivity, and Zoom meetings has certainly changed my life and enabling me to do far, far more in terms of connecting with people. So MaaS believes in a Scotland without barriers that isolate and exclude disabled people from making their choice of successful door-to-door journeys. And it's two-pronged, that is. We're looking at the accessibility of transport, but we're also looking at the fact that no matter what journey you take, you've got to look at it from door to door. A lot of the problems that we have are not down to technology, and I'm not going to dwell on some of those problems. But for example, if the bus stop is a walk away, somebody with limited mobility isn't going to be able to get to that bus stop. So we've got to join up both the physical aspects and the technology aspects. And when you are considering various different technological interventions, you've also got to see, is that feasible within the island and the community settings? So let me set a scene. A blind person wants to catch a bus on a route that they've used many times, but the timetable's changed, the bus stop has moved, new cycleways are now crossing the route that they've always known and always used. The pavement cafe has now moved in adjacent to the bus stop because it was one of those issues that addressed COVID and people sitting outside rather than sitting inside. The pavement has been reconfigured, so there's extra bollards, so that there's more pavement width, or there's these wonderful orange and white plastic barriers that people have got to maneuver around. That blind person hasn't got a Scooby about catching that bus because of all the barriers that we've put into place. And one of my ambitions is that the technological interventions that we can set up through MaaS are going to give that blind person, in an appropriate format, the information that they need to know to be able to renegotiate what's been a long established route to a bus and catching a bus that they've always caught. So there are some of the things that I want people to think about in terms of what do we need. You know, it's very, very simple things. If the timetable has changed, how are we going to alert somebody who isn't going to look at the app to see today whether it's changed? We need to have some technology that alerts people when things are changing and when the physical environment has changed and when the technological environment has changed. The transport transition plan that Transport Scotland have put in place, MaaS have contributed significantly to that, because there are lots of areas that we see as opportunities that we can actually put in place. And I will suggest that people go and have a look at the transport transition plan to see some of the initiatives that we are looking at. So all of this that we're putting in place, slide please, Ali, comes within a legislative setup, and that we're not going to be able to catch it. And it's also got to have things on that's going to help disabled communities. For example, it's all very well and good saying that the bus that's coming has got wheelchair space on it. So our person in the wheelchair goes along to the bus stop, but they're not told whether there's already somebody sitting in that wheelchair space, or whether the wheelchair space is shared with the buggies, and whether there's got to be a row as to whether it's the wheelchair or the buggy that's having the space. And it's those sort of things that they're not rocket science, but they're those sort of things that we do need to have coming forward in some of the initiatives. And those two areas have got to join up. The technology has got to reflect on the physical sides. The third area that I've actually listed is capacity. And I'm putting capacity into the whole area of people who have got autism, who've got dementia, who've got learning problems. And whatever we do has got to meet those people. So it's no good having this great big technological app intervention if it doesn't come through in plain English, because people with dementia, people with learning problems need to have plain English. They don't need lots and lots of gobbledygook that they can't understand, or else we're not giving that sector of our community, which is a growing sector of our community, the things that they need to be able to understand and therefore to travel. linking all those together, we've therefore got to have things in multiple formats. We've got to be able to cope with all of these initiatives. And we've got to be able to be cognizant of people who would not actually think of themselves as disabled. So I'm thinking in particular of everybody who's affected by mental health problems. And as we've seen in COVID, that's unfortunately a growing aspect of people who are trying to travel. So we've got to think of how we can help them, how we can help the carers who are going to be helping people. Surrounding those three cornerstones, I've got three areas that I'm bringing in. I've got end-to-end journeys, which I mentioned at the beginning, but end-to-end journeys mean that our transport apps have got to link across all of the different transport means. And they've got to tell us, be able to facilitate what we can. If I can give you an example, for 6 years when I lived on the Isle of Arran, I would book my car onto the ferry. I have a disability concession card, so I then had to provide my blue badge information every single time that I booked a ticket. And because I use a concession card, I couldn't use my concession card to buy my ticket. So therefore, when I got to the ferry terminal, I had to get out, go into the building, show them my concession card to buy my passenger ticket. Fortunately, I can get into that building. But if somebody who was in a wheelchair had to get out of their vehicle, into the wheelchair, across the forecourt, into the building, etc. When I got to the mainland, if I was going to leave my car and catch a bus, or if I'd gone over as a foot passenger, the bus stop was half an hour away. So what I would have to do is to catch a train up to the next station, get off the train, and then catch the bus. Now, my concession card only gave me a reduction on the train, so that's why I got on the bus, and that's why people would get on the bus. And that's the sort of barriers that we've got. So we need people to work not only on doing the physical side of the end-to-end journeys, but on the technological side of the end-to-end journeys. My second area that I'm highlighting are the changes to those journeys. You know, if the ferry is delayed, how am I going to know about that? How am I going to get a message? There's supposed to be, you can get text to tell you that they're going to be delayed. But if you're a foot passenger, you may not have that text. Or if that text isn't suitable for people who need to read it, then, you know, you might as well not send the text. Ali, I can't see what's in my final hexagon. The final top right hexagon.
Sorry, it says accuracy of information. Sorry, I was struggling.
Yep, the screens have overlapped it. Yep, accuracy of information. You know, if the bus is delayed, how accurate are we going to be told? If you've got to make ongoing connections, accuracy is vital to get everything that we do. So summing up, my last slide, Ali, please. There are lots of tools and there are lots of things that people will use. I've pointed to one or two things there. Equality impact assessments are vital for anything that you're going to be putting forward. An equality impact assessment needs to use people who are going to be using that technology, but also people who have got mobility problems, so that they can give you the life experience and help you to build products that are going to be used for those people. Andrew's talked a lot about the island community. The Island Act now puts forward that anything that is going to be done on the mainland also needs to have an island community impact assessment. I'm doing some work to try and join together so that there is only one impact assessment when you're looking at something that looks at the islands. But that's work in progress. But certainly, island community impact assessments, equality impact assessments are essential in any of the work that you're going to be putting forward. And when I start to look at any of the submissions, I will be looking at how you use those assessments in formulating what you're putting in, and how you continue to use those assessments as the work progresses. To give you a little bit more groundwork, I've signposted to you MaaS annual report. It's both in easy read and regular type, so it is available there, and you can see the difference in easy read. And if you want to just use it as something that's not going to send you asleep, then use easy read, because you could probably get through it quicker. And there's one final thing that I've come across that's been a report done by the Glasgow Disability Alliance that is absolutely mind-blowing in some of the problems that people with disabilities are having, both now, during COVID, and into the future. So have a quick look at that and see whether that gives you any ideas. So thank you for including me. I'm looking forward to doing some work on this particular project. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Hilary. Some excellent examples there that I think highlight why this is such an important area, and of course why it's been a thematic area in both round 1 and round 2 of the MaaS Investment Fund. Okay, we're going to go on to our third and final speaker, who is Sam Lee, who's Senior Innovation Officer at Transport for Greater Manchester. So Sam's going to be talking about what is a new thematic area for round 2, not to preempt what Transport Scotland will say in a few minutes, but Sam's going to talk to us about the urban environment. So Sam, over to you.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Sam Lee. I'm one of the senior officers at Transport for Greater Manchester. It feels very weird for me to talk to you guys about MaaS, because I'm not based in Scotland, so there's a whole other different environmental factors associated with it. But my role in the organisation is to work in partnership with SMEs, commercial partners and citizens to deliver impactful, meaningful innovation demonstrators, and for us to kind of learn from those as a whole. So over the years, we've been working on a number of different mobility as service projects, both locally, nationally, and through the European partnership as well. So in today's session, I want to just take you through some of the thinking that we have had around the future urban environments. And actually, there's a lot of crossover with things Andrew and Hilary's talked about already as a whole. So within the mobility service space in the urban environment, there are a number of kind of key focus areas where, with the climate change agenda, the decarbonisation agenda being so prominent, kind of traffic congestion, air quality, and noise pollution, improving public health. Transport safety is a critical piece right now, especially with COVID, to restore that consumer confidence that public transport is safe to use. It is a huge challenge. Hilary's talked a little bit about social equality. I think with a lot of digital solutions, digital inclusion is going to be important, increasingly more important, and how these solutions are designed, not just within the mobility space, but actually in the public sector and government space, as you see council tax through websites now, requesting bins and fly tippings through websites now. How do we make sure that those solutions links all together as a whole? And then the climate emission agendas as kind of the other focus. So what are the kind of potential opportunities with the future urban environment? I'm only going to talk about a few of these, don't worry, but this is kind of a top list of areas that we've been thinking around, and I'll go into a bit more detail about some of them in a second. But areas around immersive technology and future connectivities. What are the opportunity with things like augmented reality, virtual reality, 5G, and people working remotely? How does that all link together as one piece? And mobility credits, for urban city centre residents. Do people really need to own a car living in a city centre environment that have this, hyper connectivity, both from public transport and shared provisions such as car clubs? What are the opportunities with that, with major life events when they move? We'll talk a little bit about future work and office spaces and how that could potentially change in a post-COVID environment, and how that's a massive opportunity for MaaS to play a role to providing a flexible solution. And a lot of times when we, in public sector, we build physical infrastructure, but not really thinking about where the digital component all fits in and how people access the services. So I'll just talk a little bit about things, a project we're working on around mobility hubs and how the digital provision links into MaaS as a whole. With MaaS solutions, as you know, a lot of the solutions are starting to collect a lot of data, around movement. How can that data be used for city environments, for city partners to manage the urban environment better? How, especially in the COVID crisis, how do we gate access to certain people so that social distancing rules are followed? And what wider opportunities is there linking to, intelligent transport infrastructure, for example, traffic signal timings and wider smart city provisions? The three areas that I'm not really going to touch on, but just to get you guys to have a little bit of a think around, is what services beyond mobility should we be looking at as part of MaaS? Freight as a freight and other services, as the COVID crisis has highlighted that we could work remotely, as we don't necessarily need to go from A to B anymore. It is this B to A agenda where things are coming to us, services coming to us. So how does MaaS become the solution to provide those access points? And we, looking internationally, we're seeing a rise of things like super apps like WeChat, where they're providing a range of solutions that brings all the different access points together through one application. In China, it's the go-to app from buying your groceries to traveling by public transport. What are the opportunities with something like that for someone to access all government and public sector services as well as additional services? And this kind of touched on kind of the future of payments. With COVID, and we kind of some of been talked about by Andrew already, how do we cater for this contactless piece? Is it around new models of capping, in terms of best price guarantee? On Hillary's point around the inclusion piece, how do we create a solution that includes the bankless? How do we make sure those bits are joined up? And then the final thing is around kind of culture and sporting events experience. I think a lot of times people just think about those bookings in isolation. Is there opportunity to bring all of that together? So when someone books a theatre trip or whatever it may be, a sustainable mobility option is offered to them as a whole. I'm trying to be quick here, Ali, sorry. Apologies for talking so fast. So some of the examples on the immersive tech side and kind of future connectivity, one of the modes that always seem to get forgotten is walking. And there is a unique opportunity with mobility as a service to explore walking as a service, and things like gamification on how to encourage walking. And all of this links into a more sustainable business model, because if you've got a MaaS package and you can get a person to walk more, there's other opportunities associated with it. But I just want to draw your attention to one of the projects we worked on as part of Smart City Demonstrator, to using augmented reality to create a heads-up wayfinding solution where the user would come out of the station, hold up the phone and see different locations, nearby. They press the direction they want to travel and they just walk. At any time they feel uncomfortable, they can open the phone and reorientate themselves to, to get to their destination. How can something like that be tied to a MaaS offering as a whole? On the right, augmented reality glasses and wearables are coming. We know Apple is developing those solutions. How can something like that be integrated into the fabric of future MaaS provisions? And then the bottom left is Go Jointly, which is a gamification solution to encourage people to walk more and do kind of lunchtime walks and so on and so forth. They currently partner up with TfL to do a number of kind of trials. What are the opportunities associated with solution like that? And then on the bottom right, I think everybody is aware of the phenomenon that is Pokemon Go, that actually fundamentally change people's travel behavior. We know from some of the research that people even got offers to stop early so that they can visit a particular landmark. How can something like that be used as part of MaaS offering to better manage demand and supply? So on the mobility credit side, I actually talked a little bit about reducing personal vehicle ownership for urban city residents. What I'm not saying is that people shouldn't drive. Let's just be clear here. I think it's the right move, the right purpose from a Greater Manchester perspective, but I don't necessarily feel there's a need to own the vehicles. So there's a number of trial that's currently being looked live. In Coventry, they're looking at a scrappage scheme where a person's given £3,000, to scrap their car. We know a company called Modal Living on the right, they're a developer for high quality residential properties, have offered mobility packages as part of the rental agreement. With us in TFGM, we've offered them new tenants a year's of a Metrolink pass as part of the offering to encourage, that multimodal usage and sustainable transport usage. How can the MaaS proposition linked into that as a whole? The future of work and office spaces, we all know that's going to be hugely disrupted. The picture on the top left could be a typical council car park, that's filled with people driving there. And the changes is kind of with shared spaces. Are we all going to go back 5 days a week to the office? Should we be driving back for those 5 days a week, as a whole? Is this now the unique opportunity to force some fundamental culture change for people to use sustainable transport wherever possible? With partners like WeWork down the bottom, in the shared office space ecosystem, what role do they play in terms of the mobility as a service offering when people visit their offices, or is it part of their agreements to have office space within an environment so that you have that mobility access? And just draw your attention to a report that came hot off the press a few days ago. The OBI in Greater Manchester did a survey to business leaders to understand, what are the barriers to returning to employment. And as you can see, the 40% of it is around kind of commuting as the core challenge. So how do we use MaaS now as a way to change all of that? Mobility hubs is kind of a new concept where it is changing this incorporating this space to incorporate multiple physical modes, as well as kind of service provisions like your dark kitchens, your Amazon storage lockers and electric charging and the provision as a whole. A lot of work's been done in this area, but it's been very thought about in just physical infrastructure. What the opportunity in a MaaS digital proposition to join all of this together? When we start looking at kind of payments, seamless payments, different services, and data as a whole. Mobility hubs, you're going to start seeing different types, both on kind of the left would be something you see at an interchange, but things on your right, on the bottom right, is a neighborhood type mobility hub that's replacing parking spaces, as a whole. And then MaaS, as I mentioned, collects a lot of data. So what are the unique opportunities we can use to do travel demand management? So on the top right, there's a dashboard as part of a European project that's been put together to really visualize and understanding movement in the real time. Imagine you have in real time all the journey planner requests as part of the MaaS offering. You can now understand potential demand, 10, 20 minutes down the line. Opens up huge opportunities with demand responsive services, and making sure on-demand provisions are available, like your bike share and so on and so forth, or encouraging people to walk, with tailored messages. And there's a similar proposition on the bottom right with Amsterdam. What is particularly interesting with Amsterdam is they went beyond mobility and started linking it to energy. So if electrification and electric charging is going to be important, increasingly more prominent, how does the two interact together as a whole? That's a quick canter through. Apologies, I had to talk so quickly. But I think one thing just to really keep in mind, guys, is that a lot of the times the technology is actually the really easy component. I say this, but ticketing is a nightmare, as we all know. But I think the unique proposition is that really think about what the customer experience is like. The example I always give is Uber is not doing anything new. They just really nailed down that customer experience. And if you can do that and make sure it's inclusive, then you can create a MaaS solution for everybody. So that's me. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sam, and I appreciate you rattling through there. We are running a little bit behind time. We will try and make as much of that up as we can. I think inevitably the whole session might run 5 or 10 minutes late, so apologies in advance for that. But we are now ready to move on to the next part of today, which is we're now going to hear from Transport Scotland. I believe it's Heather Cowan and Laura McCaig who will be speaking around round 2. So I think Heather will be kicking off, but Laura, you'll be sharing the slides. So I'll leave it over to you guys.
Thanks, Ali. While Laura's just getting that set up, just to check that you can hear and see me okay.
Yep, all good.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks, Ali. And thanks to MaaS Scotland for the opportunity to speak. As you said, I'm Heather Cowan, so I'm Head of Climate Strategy and Integration at Transport Scotland. That's the new title. And I'll take you through the transport strategy policy context for MaaS remembering, as George has said in the comments, that we're talking about mobility as a service. I was going to take the approach that you've taken to the other presentations to talk about some of the challenges that exist through that policy context that MaaS can help to address, touching where I can on some of the COVID-19 impacts that we've touched on already. And then I'll hand over to Laura McCaig, who will cover what's been happening since we launched the first round of the MaaS funding and our plans for round 2 of the MaaS funding. So I think, as Sam had touched on there, the pace and scale of collapse in economic and social activity as a result of managing the COVID-19 crisis is unprecedented, has had a significant impact on travel demand, in particular the use of public transport. The longer term effects of that pandemic on the transport system in Scotland are still to be fully understood. We're at a point where we've got global uncertainty, but also as a point, as I think came out in Sam's presentation, of where there's opportunity to make decisions to change the course of behaviours in the course of transport to try and achieve some of those broader outcomes that we want to achieve. And as I think as came out in Hillary's presentation, and as we've all experienced, public transport system was imperfect prior to COVID-19. So how can MaaS help support the future of public transport COVID-19? And I do appreciate that obviously MaaS is the service offering, and therefore, the integration of modes is something that MaaS will rely on rather than be able to solve in isolation. We published our National Transport Strategy in February of this year. It set a vision, catalyst for change around the 4 priorities that you've got on your screen there. And the position is such that to aid recovery from the pandemic, our future transport system will still need to deliver all the priorities in the National Transport Strategy, but in that new post-pandemic context. In terms of the National Transport Strategy, we are now working on our first annual delivery plan, which will set out Scottish Government actions to deliver the strategy, and we will publish that by the end of this year. Touching quickly on the priorities in the strategy, so I think it's probably clearest where MaaS can support inclusive economic growth through beneficial innovation as part of development of new products or services in a way that improves our transport system and provides opportunities for supply chain to support Scotland being at the forefront of sustainable mobility. With Scottish Government having also published a CAV roadmap for Scotland, connected autonomous vehicles and ULEVs can be part of that mix of modes within a MaaS solution that support a fair and sustainable provision of mobility. We can see how MaaS can support the health and wellbeing priority by encouraging people to make active travel choices to improve their health and wellbeing, improve air quality and support local solutions, local placemaking. More cities are adopting variations on the 20-minute neighbourhood concept. So, how can MaaS solutions help people live more locally, meet most of their daily needs, travel to their daily needs within 20 minutes from their home? And noting that there was a recent programme for government commitment on the Work Local programme on the potential for local hubs to play a part in enhancing the choices available to work more locally and flexibly. Moving perhaps in more detail then on to the climate change challenge. So given the scale of the climate change challenge, this remains central to our work as transport continues to be the biggest emitting sector in Scotland. Our legal targets remain the same following the COVID-19 pandemic, and that is to reach net zero by 2045. But perhaps even more challenging is the targets around 75% reduction by 2030 and then 90% by 2040. So the largest sources of emissions in cars is emissions in cars at 40%. And in addition, 25% of emissions if you take the total of combining light goods vehicles and heavy goods vehicles. We are focusing on the movement of people for the MaaS Fund, as Laura will explain later. But I think Sam raised earlier the potential that MaaS could also have in a movement of goods settings, last mile, etc. And just to highlight there in terms of a way in which MaaS solutions could disincentivise unsustainable choices and incentivise sustainable choices. We have proportion of single occupancy cars at the moment showing underlying increase, which is something that MaaS could help to address. So as we saw with the earlier slide, COVID-19 is having a significant impact on our transport system and continues to have some changes, maybe more positive. And again, this was highlighted by Sam. For example, walking and cycling levels, which had, and I emphasize had been much higher than 2019 levels, and the unprecedented move to home working, which could have significant potential in helping to reduce emissions. And that scale of the change that we talked about. So in 2019, 4% of people worked from home. We've seen that at 44% in COVID-19. So, clearly the way in which people are, living their lives and accessing services, work, things that they need through transport, has the potential to change as a result of the impact of COVID, as it has changed drastically during COVID. So ministers have announced that the climate change plan will now support a green recovery alongside other climate change policies. In government, we're therefore reviewing our policies to understand how they contribute to the green recovery and take account of those negative and positive changes from COVID-19. So how can MaaS solutions also help lock in positive behaviour changes where possible and mitigate the negatives, the risk of the increased reliance on car. We're seeing low levels of confidence in public transport, while also ensuring that, as has been mentioned already, that we continue to consider a just transition. And it resonates with the call that Sam mentions and the stakeholders listed on the slides here for government to act quickly in responding to the changes from lockdown. To focus on the reducing inequalities priority within the National Transport Strategy. So that transition that I've talked about to green recovery and low carbon economy, we need to ensure that's done in a way that's fair and in accordance with the just transition principles. Transport has a key role to play in impacting against drivers of poverty and child poverty reduction. So transport costs are a proportion of household income. So availability and affordability of accessible transport is one of the biggest barriers to transport, and also transport provides that important role between accessing education and employment and that opportunity to improve life chances. So how can MaaS help address this, I suppose, in terms of some of the variance in pricing options that might be available to really support those that most need it in terms of the affordability of transport. And you had the presentation from Hilary here earlier, so just highlighting again that Fairer Scotland approach and also how we meet the changing needs of our population. So not only the changing needs in the way that young people are travelling and accessing services and the different ownership model there around transport, but also an increase in the ageing population and those in our population that register as disabled people. And also just highlighting another inequality is that women consume transport differently to men historically in terms of the role that they play in society and the trip training for transport. So whether MaaS, in terms of bringing together a service offering, can help adapt that service offering to meet the needs of women. So just finishing up before I pass on to Laura, overall, MaaS can support the embedding of the sustainable travel hierarchy and the sustainable investment hierarchy. These are both highlighted within the National Transport Strategy. So as I mentioned earlier about prioritising active, sustainable, public and shared transport. And the shared transport is in the because you've normally got an attendee from taxi services that normally looks out for taxis having a mention in MaaS presentation. So I made sure very much shared transport is in there. For the sustainable investment hierarchy, I think MaaS can really work with that ethos. So it is, you know, supporting about how we reduce the need to travel unsustainably, but also about how we, you know, maintain and use our existing assets as part of that, how we make better use of the existing capacity. So MaaS really has the potential to do that. And then lastly, looking at how we target new infrastructure only after we've considered how best to make use of or enhance existing capacity. So I think that's quite a quick canter through some of the National Transport Strategy policy context and some of the challenges that MaaS can help to address. And I'll hand over to Laura. Thank you.
Okay, thanks Heather. Sorry about that, I just realised I was on mute, so hopefully you can all hear me now. So great to speak to you today. My name's Laura McCaig. I'm the MaaS Delivery Manager. So I'm just going to lead on from what Heather was saying about the policies that the Scottish Government have and how that actually fits into the MaaS Investment Fund. So I thought it was easy to start with the fact that MaaS aligns with the Scottish Government strategies for a healthier, more sustainable Scotland, in that through providing better and more comprehensive travel information and introducing different travel payment options and means to access public transport, more people can feel confident to use alternative ways to travel, encouraging them out of cars and so reducing carbon emissions. Our agenda for smart travel is to improve access for passengers to the extensive and varied public transport network across Scotland for all traditional modes, active travel options and future emerging mobility modes, such as connected autonomous vehicles. So our vision is that all journeys in Scotland's public transport networks can be accessed using some form of smart ticketing or payment. So this is really where the investment fund comes into being. So we started it in 2019, where we announced we'd invest up to £2 million over 3 years to get MaaS solutions with a view to proving that the concept of MaaS works in Scotland and how we can then roll out across the country and elsewhere. So that's the aims there. I thought it was important to highlight in the guidance documentation, it sets out the various things that we're looking for in your applications. So the high level is your MaaS solution deliverables. So again, digital technologies. We want to deliver integrated, seamless end-to-end journeys, ensuring interoperability, and also how to use real-time data to optimise these journeys and provide customer information. Also, applications must address all of the core government objectives that Heather has just documented there. So the NTS priorities, the travel and investment hierarchies, and again, as I said, modal shift, active travel and digital innovation. It's also clear that your application should also cover one of the thematic areas. It can cover more than one if that's applicable, but at least one of those areas. So obviously we've talked about them this morning, but just to tell you about what happens in round one, the themes were rural islands and the communities and accessibility, but we also had a tourism theme. So from last year, from the fund going through it, there was a great lot of interest, of which we got 40 notes of interest after the feasibility stage, and this transferred into 11 bids that were received. So after evaluation, we were able to award 3 projects with funding. And just to quickly go through those, we awarded High Trans. So their pilot offers a regional multimodal journey planning system using real-time data, which offers an account-based payment system available to all users for all participating mobility options. So this project is going to go live in 2021, I think about March, and run for 12 months. And basically the project has the potential to reach over 500,000 residents and 600,000 tourists across the Highlands and Islands region. So you'll see from the 3 projects we've got, they're very different in their outlook. So that's High Trans covering the whole area. Then go to TAC Tran. Their pilot aims to assist users to coordinate the planning, booking and paying for a range of transport services, therefore making it easier for them to access more destinations in a sustainable manner. And they've got 3 distinct trials within their pilot project, and that's one at NHS Tayside, which will reach between 120 and 140 urology unit patients per week at the Perth Royal Infirmary. There's then a project at Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park where they aim to reach 4 million visitors per year. And then Dundee and Angus College, where we'll be looking at reaching about 23,000 college full-time equivalent students. The final project is awarded, the lead partner there is Dundee City Council, and they're going to be focusing on addressing many of the barriers to using public or active transport for travelling to events in the city. Their pilot supports people attending events in the Dundee area and aims to provide better information about public, shared and active travel options to venues, as well as improving travel ticketing options at the point of purchase. So 3 very different projects, and obviously I don't have time to go into detail today, but I would just want to highlight the fact that at the MaaS conference on the 30th of September, all 3 project leads will be discussing their projects. So if you haven't already signed up, I would recommend that you do so. Okay, so obviously round 1, it was a new fund. So we looked at some lessons learned of what could we do better this time maybe, or what really worked. So there was a couple of surveys done and a few key things came out of that. So first of all, the timescales, I think it was very short last year and applications went live over summer holiday time, which wasn't the best. Resources, obviously people's time was very, very tight, and I think that's one of the reasons why we now have a MaaS delivery manager, so I've been brought in to help sort smooth out the process. Match funding was also mentioned as something that was causing some issues, and I know there'll be more discussion about that later on. Also governance side of things, to address this we've expanded the working group to include more parties from a wider range of background. So the MaaS Investment Fund working group now has members from Scottish Enterprise, Sustrans, Visit Scotland, CTA, CPT, and as well as Transport Scotland, and obviously MaaS Scotland as well. And it's chaired by Roel Testroot of the Accept Institute in the Netherlands, who's obviously bringing his experience from what's happening there to the project. So I think this has been really good. Mentioned networking, it was highlighted as something that people wanted to do more. And as a result of that, the MaaS Scotland have created the online hub, which they hope that you can then, if you're not already aware of it, please have a look on their website, and I'd encourage you to join up. But it's a really good way for people to highlight their project ideas, speak to colleagues, and basically find out a bit more about what's going on. Okay, so go on to round 2. So basically we've got just over £1 million left in the fund. As we've said, the themes have changed very slightly in that we've added urban. It's not that tourism has dropped off, we're just not having it as a specific theme this year. It was felt that urban would be better served this time. Application process, if you were involved in it last year, it's practically the same. You'll need to complete an application form, business case, and a project plan and financial plan. And as Ali said earlier, we're working on the documentation and hope to get that out as soon as we can, really, so that you'll be up to date with what it is that we're looking for. So I thought it would be useful, obviously I can't go through everything in detail, but just to highlight some key points of what we're looking for this time. So all proposals must be business focused rather than pure research, and provide a MaaS solution that can be applied within the public transport realm. So we anticipate the proposals will demonstrate how innovative, how innovative the project service is and relative to the challenge that you're looking to address. We want you to be able to address a commercial strategy, including risk, and demonstrate sustainable business growth or development potential and readiness for taking to market. Within your application, you'll need to demonstrate that there's evidence-based market business research, including expected impact for the challenge areas. You'll also have to demonstrate consideration and stakeholder engagement around planning contingency for the project environment. So, for example, charging for electric modes, mobile connectivity, etc. You'll also need to demonstrate delivery around the wider public transport integration. So for example, transport modes, payment, travel data, information. And also show that the project is affordable and what your financial management is for the project, including what the key milestones are. So basically, you'll need to provide a project plan. You'll need to demonstrate consideration for marketing and evaluation. Your project will need to be accessible, inclusive and scalable. And you would be preferred if you can include details of your organisation's heritage and experience, along with identifying benefits and and risks. Turning to funding mechanisms, we're proposed to develop as simple an approach to funding proposals as possible and sufficient to encourage innovation. And where a proposal is assessed as meeting eligibility criteria of the fund, we'll fund on an accruals basis. So in other words, funding will be released on provision of evidence of achieving your agreed milestones. Depending upon legal status of applicants, the value of secured match funding and an affirmative state aid position at the time, we kind of anticipate that we'll award between 40% and 100 to 100% of funding routes. But I should note that unmatched funding proposals will only be considered in relation to third sector applications, and of those applications will only attract a maximum contribution to the fund of £20,000. So eligibility, to meet the government's partnership goals, public and private collaboration is the preferred project approach. However, other models such as singles, joint ventures, etc. and consortiums will be considered. But to be eligible, you must undertake your project within Scotland. You must deliver on a Scotland-wider public transport network, so that is traditional active travel or emerging transport options. You must have a minimum viable product or solution which is ready for testing and trial or implementation within the year of the funding award. So this is not available for anything new technology that's not ready to go yet. You also need to make sure that you comply with Scottish legislation, and it will also need to be compatible with or working towards existing Scottish public transport smart technology specifications. Also, because we've got the 3 round 1 projects, we're not saying that any applications for round 2 cannot be used in the same areas where these projects are running, but we would be looking to see how your project can complement those ones that are already happening. So if you are looking at certain areas that I've talked about previously, I would recommend either that you do get in touch with those round 1 leads, and if you're not sure who they are, please drop me a line and I can put you in touch with the people concerned. So my next slide was just, final slide really, is just to go through the timeline for this year's fund. So as we say, this is us really kicking off the stakeholder consultation today. We've got the event at the conference on the 30th, but basically this is the chance now for any questions that you have. Please feel free to get in touch with us so that we can go through the process and I can make sure that the guidance we're going to put out accurately describes what we're looking for and that you understand what is required. The pre-registration period will basically start from October till December, so we've got till the end of the year to finesse things, and then we'll have the official launch of round 2 will be in January, and then you've got a good few weeks until the end of February where the competition will close, and then we'll evaluate the awards. We hope to make the awards at the end of April. And then that would mean that the round 2 projects we would hope to start in June 2021. So that's really all from me just now. Again, another bit of a whirlwind tour there, but just to say, if you do have any questions and don't get the chance to ask today, then please feel free to drop us a line at maas@transport.gov.scot. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you to both Heather and Laura there. So we'll now move on to what is quite an important section, which is your chance to ask questions of Transport Scotland based on what you've just heard, or maybe you already had some questions to ask. There are quite a number of people on the call, so obviously we can't make it a free-for-all. So what we'd ask you to do is, if you either type your question into the chat functionality, or if you just type your name in, I can come to you and then you can ask your question directly just by unmuting yourself in order to do so. So we had one question just as you were speaking, and as you alluded to, Laura, you felt this question might be coming your way, and it was one around in the area of in-kind contributions and their eligibility as match funding. So the question came from George. George, do you want to just ask that question openly? Are you okay to do that?
Yeah, I'm fine. I've been in a discussion with and Laura's been very helpful in this, and we just really need authorities and a few companies. And one of the difficulties, local authorities were saying that, you know, in kind country. You still hear me?
Yeah, you're breaking up a little bit, George.
Yeah, okay. Can you still hear me now? Can you hear me now?
You're okay at the moment. If you break up again, I'll just take it from the chat. We can ask the question.
Was that benefit in kind, like staff time, like soft that I was used to when I developed MaaS through Scottish Enterprise, was not eligible. I think Laura hinted at that, and it had to be cash contributions. And I know these cash contributions are extremely difficult to do, and my worry, the investment.
So you broke up slightly there, but I think just to kind of paraphrase a little bit, so it's a question around benefit in kind and how that can be, or is that considered to be eligible as match funding? And George had raised the, staffing and obviously hardware and development costs, things like that, and the fact that many organisations, small and large, will find it difficult to generate a direct cash contribution into this, and it may stifle private sector investment. So, sorry, kind of long question there, but basically around in-kind contributions and match funding. So over to Transport Scotland on that one.
Okay, thanks, Ali, and thanks, George. As you say, we have been discussing this. So, yeah, in-kind contributions are not acceptable, not eligible at all at the moment. So we are looking for cash contributions. What we do say is that staff costs are acceptable, but as I say, it's not for any pre-development work. It has to be work that's going on once we've awarded, and we would have to see the invoices, etc., the evidence there for us to be able to pay that. I think in relation to investment, part of the MaaS Investment Fund was to see what private sector investment we could get as part of this. So we're really wanting to test this and see if this is actually possible. So at the moment, we're not really looking to change by making the in-kind contributions eligible, but I think, as we kind of said, it's probably something, if we think it is a bigger issue, then that we'll take it to our working group, which is due to meet in a couple of weeks' time, and debate it fuller to see if it is possible for making some changes. But that's our set out just now. Okay.
Thanks, guys. Does anyone else have any other questions for the moment? As I say, please type your name in or type the question into the chat box. Just to fill time, we've got a question from Matthew Kendrick at Rootable AI. Matthew.
Hi there, Ali. Yeah, the question was just around the scope of the proposals. During your presentation, Laura, you mentioned that it has to hit on all of the areas that included active travel and walking and things like that. If like a solution is sort of more geared towards shared transportation or something like that, are those going to be sort of lower down on the list, or you don't want to receive those? How much of all of those areas do you want included in the proposal?
I would say as many as you can. It's not that we're going to, basically it's a competitive fund, and so we only have £1 million left in it, so it's depending what applications we get as to how we evaluate it and see what ones are best. It's not that we've set out that we're only going to do only one project or only a couple of projects. It really will depend what we get. So it's just as strong an application as you can get is all I can really advise you, Matthew. Okay.
Okay. Dave, you want to bring up the question on bus connections?
Now, is that better? Have you got me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Yeah, we had a mention of the ticket machines, and when I saw them about 3 years ago when they first came out, I realised that the display available to the driver could put a manifest up. so that if you're in a rural area and you have to walk a long way to the bus stop and the bus is only every 2 hours, it's very frustrating if the bus is running a minute early and you see it disappearing over the horizon. And we're talking about, passenger confidence in public transport, the ability to give the driver a manifest so that when they come to the stop, they know they're picking up 3 passengers. And to answer the question on wheelchairs, I know that with COVID, First, Stagecoach, McGill's, most of the big bus operators are now using that real-time data from the ticket machine to say whether the bus is full and also whether the wheelchair space is available. So we can increase the confidence by getting that sort of liaison between the display that the bus driver sees at the bus stop and, you can go on your phone app and say, I want to catch the 9 o'clock bus. Please make sure you pick me up.
I'll take that one. Hi, Dave, it's Juliet here at Transport Scotland. Yeah, this is something we're looking into. We know that this information is available from the various bus operators that have ticketer machines at the moment, that they can obviously provide that data around the capacity on board. And we're looking at scooping up that data and putting it out via the Travelline Scotland site if we can. So we're in the process of working that through just now. What I would say is that I think that's part of what the MaaS solution needs to be looking at, is around helping people with the data and bringing that all into one platform that helps them get there.
Yeah, I mean, I was doing a job in Patna, and the number 4 is Ayrton Wellington, and I was working at the south end of Patna. The bus would come in and drive around the estate, and I could jump on my bike and catch it at the other end of the village. And I'd worked out that we could probably halve the number of buses on that route, cut the journey time, if only we could get people to the bus. And I think part of what MaaS should be looking at is it's probably cheaper in some ways to get a village taxi or better walking routes and cycling routes to a bus that goes on a more direct route. So we bring the passenger to the bus easier than getting the bus to the passenger. And in addition to that, we possibly want more Broxtons where the fast coach services don't get bogged down in going into cities and towns. I have an idea of junction 10 on the M9, for example, outside Stirling, which could replicate Broxton.
Cheers, Dave. So I'm conscious there's quite a few questions coming through, so we'll all need to move on, but I appreciate your input around that one. There was a question come in from, I think Neil, apologies if it's Niall, a very good question, I thought, around extensions and additional services added to round 1 projects and whether they would be eligible for funding.
Yep, happy to answer that. So yes, extensions, additional services to round 1 is eligible. It just will be treated the same as any other application that comes in, Neil. So you have to make sure that it's relevant to the themes that have been already mentioned. So as long as that's the case, then yep, no problem.
Okay. And Ash Gupta, you had a question around the COVID.
Yes, good morning, everybody. COVID-19 has effectively changed everything, and I don't think it's going to go away, and there's another 1,000 species of bats to come. So I'd like to make a plea in that budgets, I understand, are being allocated to underpin the economy and businesses so that we can get through this. Would there not be an argument for Transport Scotland to reassess its budget priorities, to claw back this million and put it into a much larger pot, which is more strategic, so that we can discuss, agree the strategic priorities based on a new world, a world that we have never navigated through before. And then, because we're more agile in Scotland than the rest of the UK, lead innovation with more scale and more resource. I just feel that what we're doing is linked to pre-COVID, and the world has changed. The hardware has to be different, and the technology inside to control health and safety of passengers is different. The underpinning of MaaS is the same, the digital one.
Okay, I think that's probably between myself and Heather. Heather, I'm not sure if you're on mute.
I'm just off mute. So I think the initial part of the question was, can we take the 1 million and put it into a bigger pot? I think the the level of investment that Scottish Government has been making to support the public transport sector during COVID has already required substantive funding for the sector. So it means that there isn't a bigger pot available to meet those aspirations. So that there isn't further funding that we can roll up and bring together with the MaaS funding, which is why we're continuing to deliver this MaaS fund as committed to previously in programme for government, and looking at how that can take account of the COVID-19 context. Thanks. Juliet, is there anything you wanted to add?
Just in terms of the data side of it, Ash, we are looking, and we will be going out next year to tender for digital data services, which is in line with what we're trying to do through Transport Scotland Act for open data. So that will be coming out, and we will continue to support that. We've worked previously with Travel in Scotland for that, and this is us taking that forward again. That will be coming out next year.
Okay, a couple more questions coming in. So the next question came from Rubina Barton, who I know is up in ZTrans in Shetland. And she's making the point that the funding seems very much focused on digital solutions rather than service solutions. And she's wondering how that sits with the need for things to be island-proofed, specifically, I guess, related to the lack of connectivity which blights so many of our island communities, and where people can make MaaS and our ability to provide real-time information in that situation, and if there's any thoughts from Transport Scotland on
that. Again, I think it probably sits between Heather and myself to answer this one. I would say that obviously connectivity, it doesn't sit with Transport Scotland, it's actually a wider Scottish Government agenda. We do feed in, and we know, for example, that our bus operators have highlighted before connectivity being an issue. And we do support and provide that information back to the Scottish Government to take forward. Heather, I'm not sure if you've got anything further on that.
I think it also comes back to the concept of MaaS, which is about using data and technology and connectivity as part of a MaaS service. So that's some of the rationale there for the approach in which we've taken. But obviously, in the broader national transport strategy context, we've talked about the importance of our islands and our rural communities, and you've heard earlier in the presentation from Hilary the requirement that we have to islands proof and carry out the impact assessments on our policy work. Thanks.
And I think we'll come to the last question for now, although I appreciate there may be more, but it comes from Anna Herriman at ZTrans. Anna. Is Anna there?
Oh, sorry, it took me a moment to find the button there.
No problem.
Yeah, it's a question around developing a sustainable business case. And really, one of the things we're currently interested in within our region is looking at better use of existing assets around community transport and demand responsive transport asset, as well as some of our more rurally located sharing bike schemes. What we're acutely aware of is that there are some aspects of these services which will never really be commercially viable. We strongly believe we can make much better economic use of the assets that are available and make better links into the existing public transport network within the region. But I just wondered, when we were talking about sustainable business case and this idea that about the future, whether you were interested in schemes that supported that sort of efficiency argument rather than something that would most definitely wash its hands in the future. Thank you.
Okay, I'm happy to pick that one up as well, unless Heather, you want to take it, or Laura?
I'm fine for you to take it, Juliet.
Okay. Basically, I think the idea being is that we wanted to be able to support something that could prove itself sustainable in the long term. However, if you think about the model of DRT at the moment, it's extremely expensive already, and anything that you could do to bring those costs down itself, I think, for a local authority would be well received and identified as a sustainable model. So I think there's potential there to do stuff with DRT services and improve on the way that they are run and taken forward. I know that there's been quite a few trials elsewhere around the country as well around supplementing some of the fixed route services to try and bring in more people into more passengers on board in that way as well. So there's definitely scope, I think, in light of the impact from COVID, to change perhaps the way that that's been viewed and worked before using some of the MaaS solutions.
Okay, thanks, Julie. I'm going to bring the Q&A to a close now in the interest of time. I appreciate that people will have more questions. If you happen to formulate those in your head before the end of the session, please put them into the chat box, because we'll record that and then we can relay that. Otherwise, of course, you can get in touch directly with the guys at Transport Scotland or ourselves at MaaS Scotland to ask those questions. I just briefly wanted to finish on the kind of next steps for the fund. So Laura touched on these during her presentation, but we'll obviously be running today's meeting. There will be further information on round 2 given at the MaaS conference on the 30th of September and 1st of October. And also, as I mentioned, that'll be a good chance to hear about the round 1 projects in more detail, as well as talking about all sorts of other topics. In particular, we're running a session specifically on COVID and its impact or potential impact on MaaS and where MaaS might be able to support. The next part, I guess, of the process is that, as we did for round 1, MaaS Scotland will be coordinating a registration of interest phase. Now, this is pre-competition, so this is not related directly to the competition as such, but it's your chance to submit through us a kind of 2-pager, if you like, on a potential project proposal. And the idea is that it will give you an opportunity to receive some direct and initial feedback from ourselves and Transport Scotland on your proposal. In other words, you can test the water a little bit before you might commit yourself to the always resource sapping actual application process. We ran this last year. It went down very well. We got a lot of good feedback on it in terms of helping people to adapt and amend projects, and in some cases decide that it just wasn't for them, but that has a lot of value as well. So I think Laura mentioned we had about 40 proposals came through our registration of interest last year. So that will come out. There'll be a template for that. It's very short. That'll be running next month from October, and it'll probably run October, November, so you'll get your feedback before Christmas and in advance of the launch of the fund in January. Laura also mentioned the MaaS Investment Fund online hub. I'd encourage you to join up to that if you haven't already, if you have interest in the fund. I think we have over 75 people now and organisations involved in that hub. Networking is difficult at the moment, there's no doubt about it, and these types of events, while they can be useful, never really plug that gap. So we've created the online hub to help to do that. If nothing else, it's a very useful repository of people and contacts, but hopefully as well it'll be an opportunity to engage in a kind of more public forum in terms of conversation and maybe even some kind of project development. So that's us for now. Thank you all for staying with us. If you want to get in touch with me, please do so. In fact, I'd always encourage you to do so. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you have on today or anything to do with MaaS Scotland or the fund. As Laura mentioned, you can also get in touch directly with Transport Scotland through their email address as well. The first part of this session will be made available. We'll make the recording available and the slides available. So if you missed anything, then you'll be able to get that. And other than that, just leaves me to say thank you. Thanks for coming along. Thanks for your input. Hope you found it useful. And I hope to hear from as many of you as possible over the next couple of months as we build towards launch in January. So thanks again to all our speakers. Thanks to Transport Scotland, and thanks to you. Bye for now.